How's it going, everybody? My name is LuckyBunz. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best Dynamax Pokemon you can power up in Pokemon GO. Dynamax and Gigantamax Pokemon have been in Pokemon GO for roughly a year now, and I have received tons of requests to make this video, but I thought it would make more sense to actually split this up into two parts, so we're going to go over Dynamax and Max Battle fundamentals in this video along with the best Dynamax Pokemon you can power up, and then we're going to cover the best Gigantamax Pokemon in a separate video. So if you are watching this video early, there is nothing to click on just yet, but there is going to be a link to the Gigantamax video either in the description down below or on screen right now. Now I do also want to mention, for any Pokemon that has both a Dynamax form as well as a Gigantamax form, something like Charizard for example, I'm not going to cover those Pokemon in this video, and the reason for that is because I think it's just better to wait until you can actually build their GMAX forms, and building a Dynamax Pokemon before, because we didn't really have that many Dynamax Pokemon in Pokemon GO, there was a little bit more practicality behind that. But nowadays, I think it's just better off to focus on the Dynamax Pokemon I'm going to talk about later in this video, and if you literally just focus on some of those, you should be good even if you are like a newer player to this system. Now, like I mentioned, I did say I wanted to go over some fundamentals about the Max Battle system, but if you guys are already familiar with any of this stuff, you can always skip ahead using the timestamps down below. So first off, in order to actually participate in Max Battles, you're going to use a resource called Max Particles. You can get these by clicking on power spots or from walking. You can collect 100 to 120 max particles from a power spot, and 300 max particles from walking 2 kilometers. The max amount of max particles, or MP, you can collect per day is going to be 800, but if you actually manage your energy correctly, you can get close to the 800 limit and then redeem the walking reward to collect more than 800 per day. The same is also true if you actually claim your MP from timed research. This is going to bypass the daily limit and stack on top of whatever you already have. So ideally, if you have max particles you can redeem from your timed research, collect the max amount you can for the day, and then go and collect those afterwards. The max particle system has actually been a very refreshing thing to see in Pokemon GO. I just feel like it rewards players who actually take it a bit more seriously and then focus on efficiency. Now, going back to the max particles though, the amount consumed per battle is going to depend on the raid boss. It can be as low as 250 max particles for a tier 1 raid, and as high as 800 MP for a tier 5, which is going to be a legendary, or a Gigantamax. What's also really nice about this system is that if you end up failing the boss for whatever reason, because sometimes they're pretty difficult to get done, you are going to get your MP back, and you can always try again. The MP is only going to be consumed if you successfully defeat that raid boss. So compared to the raid system, I mean, this is actually really nice. Now, finally, you can also remote raid into these using a remote raid pass plus the required MP. That being said though, if you do end up failing, while you will still get your MP back, you're not going to get your remote raid pass back. So I would be very careful when actually using remote raid passes for GMAX battles or even just for the legendaries, because the legendary battles cap at 4 players, whereas the GMAX caps at 40 players. I think going into a GMAX with a remote raid pass is a lot safer compared to a legendary, so keep that in mind if you decide to use them during any special events. Next up, let's go over the max battles themselves. So basically there's going to be 2 phases. You have the initial phase where you're going to charge the max meter, and then you're going to have the second phase, or the Dynamax phase, where you actually Dynamax your Pokemon or Gigantamax your Pokemon to then attack the raid boss. So during that initial phase in max battles, you want to focus on filling up that max meter as soon as possible, because you're going to be taking a bunch of damage on your Pokemon, whereas in the Dynamax phase, your Pokemon take no damage. So basically the best way to get this max meter charged as fast as possible is to avoid using charge moves and specifically focus on tapping and then swiping right or left when that Dynamax bubble appears on screen. When you swipe into that Dynamax bubble, it is going to give you a bit more energy, which is actually pretty nice to get to that meter even faster. Now, the best fast moves to use are going to be ones that are going to be 0.5 seconds, like Shadow Claw, Mud Shot, or even Pound. Making sure that you have the right fast move on your Dynamax Pokemon is extremely important for charging up that max meter, so seriously, don't overlook this part. Now, during the max phase, the fast move typing on your Pokemon is going to reflect the same one used if it's a Dynamax variant. So for example, if you have a flying type fast move on a Charizard, and then you go into the Dynamax phase, it's going to use a max move that's also going to be flying. Now, that being said though, when it comes down to Gigantamax Pokemon, they're going to have a set moveset during the max phase regardless of the typing of its fast move. This is why you want something like Dragon Breath on your Gigantamax Charizard to charge up the max meter during the initial phase, because that's going to be a 0.5 second fast move, and then during the max phase, even though it was a Dragon type fast move, it's still going to end up using GMAX Wildfire, which is going to be a Fire type moveset. Next up, let's go over your ideal battle team layout. So in max battles, you can only have 3 Pokemon that you use in these battles. So ideally, you can go with 1 attacker plus 2 tanks, or 2 attackers plus 1 tank, or 1 attacker plus 1 tank plus 1 legendary Pokemon to drop into power spots. Now, depending on the raid boss, you will want to set up your teams accordingly. The best team layout is actually going to be 2 strong defenders to tank the hits and then charge the max meter, and then swapping into your attacker for the Dynamax phase, and then swapping back to your tank after the Dynamax phase ends, and then pretty much just repeating the process as many times as needed. Now, sometimes you are going to be able to raid with pretty big lobbies depending on your local community, in which case you can actually have a legendary Pokemon in your back spot to drop into power spots afterward. You can earn a max of 5 candy per power spot, and this requires other players to have battled at that specific location. That being said though, this is very dependent on how many players you actually have. If you feel like you don't have that many around you with good counters, definitely opt for 2 tanks plus 1 attacker. Next up, let's go over max moves and their uses. So we have max attack for damage, max guard for shield, and then max heal to restore the HP for both you as well as your teammates. Now, depending on the Pokemon, you should focus on upgrading what you actually need, not upgrading every single max move for every single Pokemon. For example, GMAX Gengar is only going to need to have max attack upgraded, because it's primarily used as an attacker, whereas Dynamax Blissey only needs to have max guard and max heal upgraded because it's going to be used as a tank/healer. Now, understanding this is going to save you a ton of resources because upgrading the max moves can be quite expensive when it comes down to candy. There's going to be plenty of players out there who have tons of candy, so this isn't really going to be that big of a deal, but I also know that there's also lots of players out there who really don't have that much candy, and upgrading even once can be a big deal to them. Now, I get this question asked a lot: what's the difference between a Dynamax attacker and a Gigantamax attacker? So it's actually pretty simple. I mean, when we factor in the base stats and all the IVs and stuff like that, there's going to be its own power potential, right? But in simple terms, for Dynamax attackers, at level 1 they're going to do 250 damage, level 2 300, level 3 350. For Gigantamax, it's going to be increased by 100 for the base. So you're actually going to start at 350, then level 2 is going to be 400, then level 3 is going to be 450. So basically Gigantamax is going to get an extra boost compared to the Dynamax version, but you still want to factor in the base stats of the Pokemon, what those attack stats, defense stats, and HP stats are going to be. There's a whole lot of calculations that go into it. So in a 1-to-1 scenario where you obviously have like a Dynamax Venusaur and a Gigantamax Venusaur, obviously the GMAX is going to be better. But let's say for example you had a Dynamax Moltres and a Gigantamax Corviknight. Naturally, because Gigantamax is going to do more damage, you would think that Corviknight's going to be the better attacker, right? But not necessarily, because Moltres is going to have a much higher attack stat. Therefore, even with that extra boost for Gigantamax Pokemon, Dynamax Moltres is still going to be the one that you actually want to go with as far as flying type attackers go. So it really does come down to each individual Pokemon plus the GMAX boost, and that's kind of where it all gets a little bit complicated. We're definitely going to see Dynamax Pokemon become more meta relevant in the future as we get access to new legendary Pokemon. As of right now, it's only been a year since we've actually had the system in place, so I guarantee this is going to change in the future as far as what we actually want to be using. I think the easiest way to look at this though is just to focus on the Gigantamax Pokemon where you can. More often than not, they are going to be better than any of the other Dynamax Pokemon that we do have in game. But you know, with certain Pokemon like legendaries for example, we are going to have some Dynamax legendaries that are actually going to be the best, even compared to some of the other GMAX Pokemon that we have. Next up, let's talk about Max Guard. So pretty much after using this, the boss is going to strictly target your Pokemon and ignore the others for a certain duration. It's a pretty good strategy to actually stay in the battle longer, and you're also going to have shields appear next to the HP of your Pokemon, which indicates you do actually have Max Guard active. You can do this 3 times in a row to get 3 shields. You will not get more shields than that unless you're using Zamazenta, which actually starts with 1 shield and then you can add 3 shields later. That's a really good Pokemon to use, we'll talk about later on in this video. But these will not show up on your teammates' Pokemon, only your Pokemon. And once again, if you actually use Max Guard, the raid boss is going to focus its attacks on you until your shields are going to be depleted. But your friends won't actually have to worry about taking damage during that duration, which is actually kind of a good strategy. Now finally, let's talk about Max Heal. So this move is basically going to heal based on a percentage of the user's HP. This is why Blissey is the GOAT when it comes down to tanks for the max battle system. Not only does it have access to the highest HP stat in the game, but it also gets access to the 0.5 second fast move Pound, which can be used to charge the max meter as fast as possible. So combined together, right, you have a Dynamax Blissey that's just going to tank everything, and it also has the highest HP stat, so when you go into that Dynamax phase, you can literally heal all of your friends' Pokemon, and boom, you're going to be ready to go for the next round. Do that as many times as you want to, and you're going to be set to pretty much take down any Gigantamax raid boss. Blissey literally changed the max battle system completely when it came out, so I think as long as you build one of those, you're going to be pretty solid. Now the final thing I want to talk about is going to be powering up your Pokemon and unlocking the max moves, and which is the best order to actually do it in. So first of all, if you have a good IV spread you got from max battles, just use that. And if you didn't get a good IV spread, then ideally you should try and get a lucky variant. This is going to cost you half the normal amount of Stardust to power it up, and either way the cost should be pretty minimal here because you only want to power up these Pokemon to level 30 at first. That's going to cost you 75,000 Stardust and 66 candy, or 37.5 thousand Stardust if it is going to be a lucky variant. Now after you've done that, you should then focus on upgrading the max moves that it actually needs. For most attackers, this really just means upgrading the max attack to level 3, and then after you've done that, you can decide if you want to power up the Pokemon further to level 35, 40, or even 50 if it's actually super good. For reference here, I've only taken my Blissey to level 50, everything else is pretty much at level 30, because that Pokemon is one of the best you can invest into as far as tanks go, and I have no regrets doing that. But most of my attackers, they get the job done at level 30. That's perfectly fine with max attack 3. I think the biggest complaint I hear from players is that they have to rebuild Pokemon that they already spent time building for the raid battles, a few years ago and stuff like that. And while that is a valid complaint, I really don't feel like it's that bad. Like 75,000 Stardust, 37.5 thousand Stardust if it's a lucky variant, that really isn't that much. And just to be able to participate in these GMAX battles, you get so much Stardust back. So overall, when it comes down to it, I really don't think it's that bad. Like, at least it's not as bad as some players are making it out to be. The Stardust investment can be very minimal, especially if you do get lucky variants for these Pokemon. And then overall, once you got them, you don't have to really build that many more of them. There's like a handful of attackers you do want to use. You of course want to focus on getting some good tanks in there, but we'll talk about that all in a second here. Anyways, with that being said, those are all the basics I feel like you guys need to know for this video. There's probably other things I could have talked about with the Dynamax system, so if you do feel like I left anything out, or if you have any additional questions, just let me know in the comment section down below. But now I think it's time to go over the featured Pokemon. So we talked about this Pokemon earlier while we were going over the fundamentals. I think it's probably the best Dynamax Pokemon you can invest into, and that's going to be Dynamax Blissey, as the best tank slash healer in the game with the fast move Pound. The only Pokemon that actually rivals Dynamax Blissey is going to be Zamazenta in its crown form, which isn't exactly the easiest Pokemon to obtain. I mean, even if you do happen to get Crown Zamazenta, getting the candy required to upgrade the max moves, power that thing up, it's quite expensive, whereas Blissey is a little bit more accessible. Chansey spawns in the wild, you can always farm Dynamax Blissey for more candy and extra large candy. It's definitely a Pokemon you can slowly work on building up over time. So worst case scenario, if you can't get yourself a Zamazenta, 2 Dynamax Blissey is going to be extremely solid. If you're a new or returning player, I really don't even feel like you have to focus on attackers at first, just focus on building a really solid tank like Dynamax Blissey, and you're going to be able to help out your teammates so much more than just focusing on attackers. Like, just trust me when I say that. Tanking in the Dynamax system is incredibly important. Now ideally when it comes down to getting a good IV spread on Blissey, you only have to focus on 15 HP and 15 defense. The attack IVs don't even matter. Now following that, of course, I do want to go over some attacker types that you guys might want to invest into. A really good Pokemon that I think that is worth building is going to be Dynamax Excadrill, as both a ground type attacker and possibly even as a steel type attacker. Mostly as a ground type attacker though. So when it comes down to Excadrill, the nice thing here is that it actually gets access to 2 0.5 second fast moves, both Mud Shot as well as Meadow Claw. And this is one of the more useful Pokemon you guys can build because Excadrill as a ground type attacker is used quite frequently in max battles. There's just a ton of raid bosses that are weak to ground type moves, so it works out very, very well. There really isn't anything that's probably going to outclass this for a long time, so Dynamax Excadrill is probably going to be one of the better investments you guys can invest into. Next up we have Dynamax Omastar, so this is going to be used as a rock type attacker. This is also going to require an elite fast stamp to get Rock Throw, which isn't necessarily a great thing, and that's because we do have other rock type attackers in the game that could get released into the Dynamax pool at any time. So when it comes down to it, I might be a bit more cautious with this investment just because that elite fast stamp should be used on something you're probably going to get more use out of for the long term. Next up, we're going to go over 3 Dynamax legendaries I think are worth investing into as attackers. The first one is going to be Dynamax Latios, which is actually the best psychic type attacker you can use right now in max battles. And you could also use this as your Mega Evolution as well, so it can be a 2-in-1 kind of Pokemon. But overall, I do think if we ever get Dynamax Mewtwo, for example, Dynamax Latios is going to be a thing of the past. Following that, we're going to have Dynamax Moltres, which is actually going to be the best flying type for Dynamax until we get access to Rayquaza most likely. Like I mentioned earlier, Gigantamax Corviknight is one that is probably still going to be a good Pokemon worth building, but for like pure DPS, Dynamax Moltres is going to be the better option to go with. GMAX Corviknight though does take on a very unique typing being Steel and Flying, which gives it a lot more resistances, so therefore as a tank, this Pokemon is probably something I am going to build in the future. Now our last Dynamax legendary I want to go over is mainly if you just don't have Gigantamax Toxtricity, and that's going to be Dynamax Raikou. Now the only reason I'm not recommending Zapdos here as well is because that actually requires an elite fast TM for Thundershock. Once again, I think it's only worth building this if you just want to have something different compared to Gigantamax Toxtricity, but like I mentioned earlier, ideally you do want to have 1 solid attacker plus 2 tanks. So pick which one you want to actually use, either Gigantamax Toxtricity or Dynamax Raikou. I'm going to go with Gigantamax Toxtricity personally. Now there is actually an honorable mention I want to go over before we cover the final 2 Pokemon of this video, and that's going to be Dynamax Metagross. So this can be used as an attacker slash tank, and this Pokemon used to be really good to build for max battles, but now that we've gotten Zacian, Zamazenta, we have Dynamax Latios, I mean, its usability as an attacker has gone down a ton given its specific typings, and then even as far as tanks go, we have Dynamax Blissey, which is the GOAT. So I probably wouldn't invest into this Pokemon anymore, but I would still consider it just because Metagross is useful in other aspects of the game like raids, rockets, PvP, and it's also going to get access to a future Mega Evolution that's going to make it one of the best Steel-type attackers to use in the game, as far as raids go anyways. So if you do happen to get the Dynamax Hundo, I think it's definitely worth building because you could always use it as a future Mega Evolution as well. Now finally, our last 2 Pokemon that I'm going to talk about are going to be Zacian and Zamazenta in their crown forms. When transformed into their crown forms with 1000 energy, you're going to be able to use these Pokemon in Dynamax battles. So technically Zacian and Zamazenta aren't Dynamax Pokemon, but they also are Dynamax Pokemon. Anyways, you guys get the idea here, that's why I included them in this video. Now overall, Zacian is going to be the best General's attacker with Behemoth Blade, and Zamazenta is going to be the best defender next to Blissey. So ideally you would want to get one of each, and this is going to require you to do about 10 raids each in order to earn that energy. Now for Zacian, I would focus on upgrading max attack and then upgrading the other max moves later on, and then for Zamazenta, I would focus on upgrading max guard and then focus on the other moves later on as well. Both Pokemon are going to be incredibly useful. I built 2 Zacian and 1 Zamazenta. I thought that made the most sense because sometimes I do want to have 2 attackers and 1 tank, but then other times I'm going to go with 1 Zacian and then my Zamazenta plus my Blissey. Now overall, there really isn't a big list of Dynamax Pokemon worth powering up, as most of the best attackers do fall into the Gigantamax category, so if you are curious which are going to be the best Gigantamax Pokemon to invest into, then I recommend watching this video next.